Phase 1 of reopening our area is now underway after Western New York met the state's metrics on Monday. Joining us on the show to discuss that reopening effort is State Senator George Borrello. Senator, great to have you here with us today. Thank you.
Good to be back, Justin. Thanks for having me.
Well, during the governor's briefing on Monday, when it was announced that Western New York would now begin reopening, what was the first thing that came to your mind?
First thing that came to my mind was not soon enough. This has been a struggle, particularly for those folks that have been so negatively impacted by the mismanagement of our unemployment system, the arbitrary and capricious manner in which certain businesses have been allowed to operate while others have not. So it's time for us to, start to carefully and safely reopen our economy, and this is the first step. So, as I said, couldn't happen soon enough.
Now, health experts continue to stress that COVID-19 is still very much a threat, but now that we are into that reopening process, what do you want to see happen here in our community?
First and foremost, I urge everyone to use common sense, and I talked about this yesterday on my Facebook Live. Respect others. Understand that this is still something that is a threat, and we need to act responsibly and safely. And that starts with using common sense. Understanding that even though you may have some questions as to whether or not PPP is effective, or it might be uncomfortable to wear some kind of a face covering. Understand that seems to be, at least from what we can see so far, having some kind of a positive effect on reducing the spread. As we've heard from the county officials, our rate of infection here is still very low. And despite that, we saw a few extra cases over the weekend. When you consider it even just as a percentage of our population, we are still very low. And that in and of itself is a double-edged sword. It's good that we haven't had as many infections, but it also means that we still have people that are susceptible to infection. So exercise common sense. Please respect others. Please understand that there are those folks that are at high risk, and they need to be protected. And we all have our own responsible actions to take in order for us to ensure that we don't slide backwards. And I don't think any of us want that.
Yeah. Now, you were a business owner prior to your work now in public service. What are those in the community who own those small stores and shops doing to now get through this process to open up?
Well, first and foremost, pretty much all of them are struggling, and some have been given status as an essential service of some kind. They're somehow involved in the supply chain of essential workers, providing those needs, and they are operating. Some of them are not operating at full capacity. They're only operating to produce products that are in need for that essential service. But now that we've entered phase 1, now we're seeing the expansion of that. And the small business owners that I've been in contact with, myself, my wife and I, we are in the restaurant business, and it has been a struggle, but we have gotten creative as others have, and we've also worked together. It's great to see, in the case of the restaurant business, for example, we're on weekly Zoom calls with other restaurant owners throughout Western New York, sharing creative ideas and best practices, talking about how we can advocate on behalf of our industry, but also the big topic of discussion is how do we keep ourselves and our guests safe? In my role as a state senator, I'm speaking to businesses as to developing their reopening plans. This is something that Assemblyman Goodell and I pushed so hard for over a month ago when we said in our reopening plan, which, by the way, was largely adopted by the governor, and we said to those businesses, please start producing your own plans following those CDC and OSHA guidelines. We've since then worked with the Chamber of Commerce and other organizations to help provide templates and assistance. And it's really been a fantastic collaborative effort on the part of the small businesses and businesses in general throughout our region to help each other out and to ensure that we stick together in this united effort. And I'm very proud of how we have stuck together, and it has had a meaningful and positive impact on the influence that we have on Albany.
Now, one big thing to note there is this reopening effort really came from you and Assemblyman Goodell here in Western New York, kind of pushing the envelope along, saying, okay, it's time. here's a plan, take this, let's do it. And now that plan really, especially with those economic development regions, are all across New York State. And there's no changing what has happened, but looking at what has happened, do you feel that we could have been in a better place than we are now if we all would have worked together as soon as COVID-19 has started and maybe not have been so reactive? Or do you feel that the measures that have been taken were right for the information that we had at the time?
It's always easy to be the Monday morning quarterback, right? And I think that's what some people are doing. I think the governor, with all the unknowns that we had, he took the steps he felt were necessary to keep people safe, at least initially. But along the way, we have to say that some mistakes were made. And look, we are all operating as human beings, trying to do the best that we can. But at the same time, don't double down on mistakes, and that's where we are now. We have seen the continued, violation of our constitutional rights, both state and federal constitutional rights. We've seen things like the poor decision on nursing homes, sending COVID-infected patients back into nursing homes, which has now pretty much been outlined as a mistake. But yet now the governor wants to further burden those nursing homes with unnecessary testing of their employees and patients. That's going to be costly and could likely result in shutting many of these adult care facilities down. So let's not double down on bad mistakes. Let's admit those mistakes and move forward. I'm not going to second guess those decisions, but I will say that we do need to not compound those problems.
Is that what you're hearing from people in that town hall style Q&A that you took yesterday, where they were concerned with all that has happened? I mean, we've had now 3 protests just here in Jamestown speaking out about how people are upset because of these regulations.
I'm hearing a lot of things from a lot of people, but first and foremost, I think people have to understand one basic thing. No one is advocating for us to just flip a switch and go back to doing things the way that we were prior to this pandemic. Even those plans that have been well thought out, all of them include continuing the safety measures, sanitizing, social distancing, wearing PPE, ensuring that we're controlling the situation as much as possible to reduce the risk. So the only people out there that are saying that we're not doing those things are the people that are trying to be political about this.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, there will be a quote unquote new normal, if you will, at least for now. And what I am hearing from folks is the frustrations with the inequity that they see. How is it that we can have literally thousands of people every day streaming into Walmart and Home Depot and other big box stores, and where we've not seen any flare-ups, but yet they can't go into a local jewelry store or florist. How can we see construction projects that were publicly funded, taxpayer-funded construction projects that never skipped a beat during this whole process, where again we didn't see any flare-ups? Those could continue on, but privately funded construction projects were shut down. So throughout this whole process, there has been an inequity, and that's what I'm hearing most from the business owners and the people that and not just business owners, but the people that that work and want to go back to work and want to ensure that their families for the long term are being taken care of. This whole idea of paying people more money on unemployment than they were making when they were working is certainly a short term comfort for people. But most of the people that I know believe and understand that the risk to the businesses surviving long term is great, and that's where we stand right now.
Now, today, your office announced, along with Assemblyman Goodell, that you're sending a letter to the governor asking him to support teacher-based education. Why is it important to keep that attention to teaching while balancing the importance of public safety, especially with children?
Well, I think everyone will admit that while we, out of an abundance of caution, we had to shut down our schools, with very little, actually no notice, and try to quickly pivot to what they call distance learning. And that is understandable because of the situation of the pandemic. But now the governor is looking at, as he's called it, reimagining education, with Bill Gates and talking about distance learning. And to me, that's a very short-sighted and myopic view of what our educational institutions do. they are not just the place where we disseminate information to children. It's also about the social skills they learn. It's about the community involvement. It's about the a community that, especially in rural areas, that are oftentimes built around our school districts. So there's so much more to it than just the dissemination of information. Also, in our poor rural areas, and school is often the safest place for kids. What I've heard from so many educators, so many administrators, is that once this thing happened, they lost track of lots of students that they have not been able to get in touch with, whether it's phone or email or whatever. They have fallen off the radar, and those kids are at risk. And now we don't know what's their education essentially stopped. And on top of that, those at-risk kids, school was the safest place. Oftentimes, it was the only place that they got a decent meal. And while that's not the primary purpose of school, we cannot discount the fact that is an important role that schools now play. Also, when we start talking about rebuilding our manufacturing in base here in our area, which is critically important, part of that is the vocational education, the P-TECH, the BOCES, the applied sciences, and skilled trades. Those cannot be taught remotely. Those cannot be taught over a Zoom conference. So it's a very myopic view of what our education system is, especially in that K through 12 sector. And we just urge the governor to have a better, more holistic view of the importance of education and the importance of our educators, and that one-on-one interaction with students that creates responsible citizens and people that are able to communicate with one another. It's just very, very important.
And there's so many topics that I think everything is affected by COVID-19 going forward. I would imagine if we went on the street, we wouldn't find one person who didn't have some sort of impact. Tourism, though, that's huge for our area. With events being canceled just yesterday, we learned the fair's postponed, still uncertainty with things like the Lucille Ball Comedy Festival here in Jamestown. Do you think that organizers maybe are being too cautious with making those decisions? And what is the future of that industry that you know fairly well?
Well, yeah, this is an industry that I'm involved with personally and have been for years in various forms. You've got this broad spectrum of events, from the small local festivals, the Festival of Grapes in Silver Creek in my home community that was started the year I was born, 1967, has for the first time in 53 years has been canceled. The Chautauqua County Fair, as you brought up. There's been countless festivals, fairs, concerts, and events. Chautauqua Institution's season has been canceled. And in some cases, I think that they were a little premature, but I do know, because I know this industry, that the tremendous amount of preparation that goes into these events. And that's really what this is about. If you have an event that's taking place in, say, July, you were planning for this since the previous July, and you were making commitments months and months in advance. We have to have deposits and down payments for things like vendors and talent, for the infrastructure that you're going to need to put that event on. So I understand that there is so much that goes into it. You don't just open the gates one day and let people in. There's a tremendous amount of preparation, and that, as a result, is why many of these events, even going into the fall, have been canceled. But it also speaks to the importance of what are people going to do. And we have to recognize the fact that the things out there that people can do, going to parks, going to beaches, going to these open public venues, and being able to go out to restaurants, to take your boat out onto the lake or go fishing. Those are the things that people are going to turn to. And as a result, we have to ensure that those things are being done safely and responsibly.
And finally, we thank you so much for joining us here today. Only a couple minutes left. What message do you have for residents as we continue to move forward with this reopening, trying to do it as responsibly as possible, as you said?
As I've been saying, please exercise common sense and please respect others. I can't emphasize that enough. We cannot afford to slide backwards. And yes, although you may not perceive this as something that is a threat to you personally, please be conscious of the fact that there are others in those high-risk categories where this is a very real threat. Please understand that this inconvenience right now is likely going to be inconvenience right now for the short term is likely going to lead to a faster and more sustained recovery, and that is critically important. Our economy has been devastated. throughout the nation, and especially here in the rural areas of New York. But there are positive things on the horizon, and that is the fact that I believe that people will now understand what we all know here in Western New York and the Southern Tier, and that this is a beautiful and wonderful and unique place to live. And I think people may rethink the idea of living on top of one another in crowded urban areas, and they may decide to move back here. So please work together with your friends and neighbors to keep this forward momentum. Be safe, so we can in turn, take advantage of what might be a renaissance for our region.
All right, New York State Senator George Borrello joining us on the show today. Sir, thank you. Always a pleasure to have you.
Same here. Thank you, Justin.